So our next area that we're going to study is assessment. What is assessment? What are some good characteristics of assessment? And how do you use an assessment? Before we dive into aspects of assessment, let's define some terms that are used when we talk about assessment so that we're all using the same terminology. First, assessment includes all processes involved in making decisions about student process. So anything that you're using, or all of the things that you're using to determine student progress. Measurement is a numeric description of an event or characteristic. It uses measurement in quantifiable terms. Evaluation is a judgment process. So measurement and evaluation are put together for assessment. So measurement, you're just measuring. You're taking someone's height. You're measuring what they know about a math topic or a science topic. It's just measuring, just like you're weighing someone or finding their height. However, to assess, you also need to evaluate. What does that mean? So if we're thinking about height and weight, are they tall for their age? Are they overweight? Is that person underweight? What's the BMI? So putting judgment, or what does that measurement mean? So you need measurement and evaluation to equal assessment. Oftentimes, test is used as a synonym for assessment. A test is a form of assessment. It can help you measure and then evaluate a student's progress, but it's not the only assessment. So it's just a single form of an assessment to gain information. Now that we have defined terms that go along with assessment, let's talk about purposes of assessment, or why we would even want to use them. First, assessments can guide a teacher's instructional decision making, deciding what to teach, when to teach it, what needs to be retaught, what have students mastered and you can move on from. All those things are told to you by different types of assessments. Assessments can also help teachers and school personnel diagnose issues. You can diagnose learning disabilities, needs for special education, but you can also diagnose issues in a student's learning. Well, you can take apart different assessments and find out where students are not understanding, so you can diagnose misconceptions as well. Another purpose of assessment, what people generally think of, is determining what students have learned. Have they met the standard? Have they met your learning goals and objectives? You wouldn't know unless you assess. You can also evaluate the quality of instruction. How well did the teacher teach that content? Was it covered well enough? Did I, as a teacher, encourage misconceptions in students, or go too fast and they didn't understand? So you can evaluate your own teaching with an assessment. Assessments can also promote learning. Students can actually learn by taking an assessment. Oh, they finally make connections. They can say, oh, I see what that means, or oh, I finally get that. So it can actually promote learning, taking an assessment. It can also show students, oh, I didn't really understand that. Maybe I should go back to that, or I need to ask a question about that because I don't understand it. And assessments can increase student motivation. If a student knows that they will be assessed on a topic or content area, any form of assessment, then they're more likely to have a little bump in motivation, that they know that someone's going to measure and evaluate their performance, so they're going to try a little bit harder to do well. So those are some purposes of assessment. You should know that teachers spend a third of their time engaged in some type of assessment, and that's on the low end. It's a low ballpark figure. So teachers spend about a third of their time in assessing their students. So something to remember when you're thinking about when to assess or how to assess or what to assess, that assessment needs to be incorporated directly woven into a classroom. It's not an additional thing that needs to happen, but it's an integral part of the teaching learning process. So one way to integrate assessment is to remember to align the teaching and learning process. And here in this graphic, you can see that each thing is dependent on the other. It's not that one leads to another, but they're co-related. They are interdependent. They depend on each other. We'll start with learning objectives because that's generally where you want to start. Learning objectives are the outcomes that you want for your students. The what do you want them to know and be able to do at the end of a lesson, a unit, the school year, a grading period. So those stated things you want students to learn. Now your learning objectives are going to influence the type of assessments that you create or that you use, and your instructional activities, how you teach. And you want those to be similar. You don't want to have a learning objective that asks for higher order thinking skills and then you lecture the whole time and you never allow time for kids to use higher order thinking skills, because then they're not going to learn how to do that. They're not going to learn how to use those skills. You also don't want to have objectives that ask for low-level thinking and then your assessment asks for high-level thinking. So you want to make sure that they're similar, that you're testing or assessing in the ways that you're teaching, which also line up with what you want students to know and be able to do in content and in method. Remember, if it's worth teaching, it's worth assessing. So everything is fair game when you're thinking about what you need to assess. One way you can work on aligning your teaching and the learning of your students, having that curricular alignment, is by using Bloom's Revised Taxonomy, which looks similar to this. You've seen it before in a previous slide, but this is Bloom's Taxonomy. If you look at it on the words around the outside, remember is the lowest level of thinking, then understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So it's an order with remember at the lowest end and create at the highest end. And you can use this to help you when you're writing your objectives, thinking about how to teach and how to assess. So if you want your students to be higher order, but they don't necessarily need to create something new, you might state an objective that says students will recommend a historical site to visit when you visit Washington, D.C. for those fifth graders at South Wayne who are going to visit Washington, D.C. next week. So those words that are in the center, you can use those to help you write your objectives. Well then, in order to recommend a historical site, they need to do some research. So that's some higher order skills. And then to assess that, you're going to actually read their recommendations and see if they've provided enough information and an informed decision. So that's an example of how to align the teaching learning process. A non-example, or what you wouldn't want to do, is if you wanted students to think in higher order, and so you have them justify why you would visit certain things when you go on a field trip to Washington, D.C. And then for your instructional activities, they need to look up and create a list of different sites in Washington, D.C. Well, then how would you assess that? Would you just have them turn in the list, or would you have them then write a paragraph about which one they want to visit? Well, if you have them make a list, you don't know if they've met that objective because they haven't been able to justify which sites to visit. So you don't know if they met the objective. If you ask them to list, it lines up with your instructional strategy, what the activities the students did, but you don't know. If you ask them to write a paragraph, that might help you understand if they've met the objective, but you haven't helped them, you haven't taught them in a way that helps them meet that objective. So it's important to have an alignment of all three aspects.